Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to Talk Like a Leader. This week's episode is titled The Power of Meta Conversations. Now, first, let me define what a meta conversation is so that we're clear about what I'm talking about. A meta conversation is basically a conversation about the conversation. And the idea is this: it's more a conversation about the process or the results or the way we're having the conversation than it is about the specific topic of the conversation. So here's an example. Let's say you're in a team meeting and you're discussing some particular project. The project is the topic of the conversation. If your team discussions about projects tends to end up with people being frustrated and disenfranchised and feeling like they didn't have their voice heard, or people being irritated, or whatever the outcome is, then talking about the process that leads people to being frustrated is a meta conversation. Talking about how you talk about projects is a meta conversation. So it might sound something like this to distinguish how the different conversations start. If you say, we're here to talk about a new software implementation, then your conversation is about the software implementation, and it's a topical conversation or a topical discussion. If the meeting starts this way, let's have a conversation about how we interact as a team when we're discussing new software implementations. Well, that's a meta conversation because now you're talking about how you talk about new software implementations. Okay, what's the point of this episode? The point is that the better you get at meta conversations, the better you're likely to get at resolving conflicts, heading off misinterpretations, heading off hurt feelings, heading off problems that cause people to disengage from the process, that sort of thing. It seems a bit silly, and frankly, the first time I heard this concept, I was a little confused. I was thinking, why don't we just talk about the thing we want to talk about rather than talk about how we talk about the thing we want to talk about? I was very confused. So I'll give you a couple of examples where this has been helpful in my life, and hopefully we can help you find the connection that helps you in your leadership journey to become a more effective communicator, to talk more like a leader. And I'll use something that happened with my wife, Sandra. Actually, two different situations. There have been more than this over time. We actually continue to have meta conversations, and as our relationship has grown over the last 30 plus years, being able to talk about the conversation itself, talk about how we talk about the conversation, has helped us head off so many relationship problems. Okay, here's an example. I think I may have actually mentioned this general idea in a prior episode, in that under the DISC model, and I have a number of episodes about the DISC model, and Kevin Eichenberry and I own a website, discpersonalitytesting.com, where you can go learn about the DISC model and get DISC assessments, DISC training resources. Sandra and I have different DISC behavioral and communication styles. She has a lot of dominant, inspiring traits. I have a lot of cautious, supportive traits, and we both have a little bit of the flip. So she has a little bit of cautious, and I have a little bit of dominant. But the big difference is that my cautious trait interferes with her inspiring trait, and my supportive trait interferes with her dominant trait. Well, her natural communication tendency is to be quite intense and passionate about things, very strong facial expressions, very directive comments, very high energy conversation. And the energy of that conversation, not always, but sometimes, can feel a little aggressive to me. And so I can perceive that she's angry. And the unfortunate thing is, if I perceive her as being angry, then I get angry. And unfortunately, once I get angry, now she is angry. And it's just this ugly cycle. So we have had conversations about how we have conversations where we were talking about how I could get better at differentiating between when she was angry and when she was just intense or passionate, and what she could do to help me understand it better. So basically, we were talking about how each of us could contribute to navigating this kind of built-in conflict we have just because of our styles, and how we could together successfully navigate around it. Now, in our case, I'm not going to say that you want to do what we did. I'm just going to say, here's what we came up with. We came up with the agreement that if I was confused, if I was perceiving her to be angry, then basically she agreed not to get angry if I asked her if she was angry. And I don't ask quite so directly, are you angry? It's more this way. Hey, honey, this is feeling a little intense to me. Are you angry about this issue, or is this just a passionate, intense moment? Now, the important thing is we had a conversation. I didn't just spring that question on her. We had a conversation about how we could navigate it better. And we both agreed in advance that it was okay for me to ask that question, and she would answer it. And then we will both do our best to try to abide by whatever situation we were in at the time. It's helped us navigate through a whole bunch of times when I thought she was angry, when in fact she wasn't. The meta conversation helped us navigate it better. Another situation is that early in our marriage, I would ask things like, now this goes back before we had online banking and all this kind of stuff. She would go shopping, she would bring something home, she'd be very excited about it. I would ask her how much it cost, and she would get very upset. She would feel like I was criticizing her, judging her, thinking she spent too much money. So she perceived my question as an aggressive question. I didn't mean it that way, by the way. I was really trying to figure out what number I should put in the checkbook so we didn't bounce checks. But it doesn't matter that my intent wasn't negative. She heard it as negative. And so we actually had to have a conversation about that interaction. We had a conversation about the conversation so that we could figure out a way to navigate through it. Now, in our case, again, we came to a different way of communicating about it. And this has actually kind of gone away because everything is online now and I can check without even asking her. But for a while, I would ask the question, what number do I put in the checkbook? Now, see, the thing is, our meta conversation led to me having a different question to ask that got the information I needed without criticizing her or making her feel like I was criticizing her. So we had a meta conversation, a conversation about the conversation so that we could each better understand what the other person intended by their behavior or their word choice or their tone so that we could have a clearer understanding of each other and navigate a potentially tricky situation better. Now, here's the idea. You can take the same idea and have this conversation with members of your team, with your peers, with your supervisor, with your whole team together, and you can talk about potential sticking points or friction points in your interactions so that you can figure out how to not have those sticking points in the future. One of the keys is you really have to do this in a pretty intentional way when nobody's upset. You know, what you need to do is frame it around the idea of let's talk about how this situation or this process or this meeting dynamic or whatever the situation is, how it happens and how we tend to wind up at the end of it. And now can we talk about a way that if we run into this situation in the future, maybe we can do it better together. The reason this works so well is that you're framing the conversation, you're entering a conversation, hopefully in a way that you're pursuing a goal that both of you, or all of you, if it's multiple people, share an interest, have a common desire to see a particular outcome. Like if I'm in a conversation with my wife or you're in conversation with a team member, you both probably want it to come to a peaceful resolve, a clear outcome where both of you feel good about how the conversation went, rather than ending with frustration and stress and miscommunication. So if you're talking about how do we arrive at this place that we both hope we get to, it can help you identify the friction points, talk about them when neither of you is upset, neither of you hopefully is feeling defensive, so that you can both engage in a productive and fruitful conversation about how to do it better in the future. Now, one critical point when you're having these conversations is you may be able to point to past conversations to illustrate where things went wrong, be careful of the tendency to drift back into trying to relitigate or rediscuss past grievances. That's not the point of a meta conversation. The meta conversation is designed to help you talk with other people, team members, coworkers, your supervisor, maybe customers, maybe your spouse or your kids. Have a conversation about how you have the conversation so that you can do it better in the future. If you'll work on having very clear and very fruitful and very open and productive meta conversations with other people, you can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.